Senior American and British lawmakers and officials on Monday called on the Obama administration to not turn a blind eye to attacks by Iraq on Ashraf residents and urged the State Department to remove the group from its blacklist. The announcement was made at a conference in the House of Commons where speakers represented a majority of MPs and over 250 members of the House of Lords. Governor Howard Dean and former Congressman Patrick Kennedy joined Lord Corbett of Castlevale and other British dignitaries at the conference.
As we meet some 3,400 resistance members at Camp Ashraf in Iraq are under menacing attack on the direct orders of the Iraqi Prime Minister, as its 5th Division has forced entry into the camp in around 30 or more armoured personnel carriers and Humvees. Defenceless refugees with no more than their voices and their hands to try to stop this violation of their human rights. This military attack, because that's what it is, on defenseless refugees is in violation of international humanitarian law and in clear breach of undertakings given by Iraq to ensure the safety and security of Ashraf residents. It follows early attacks on the camp in which 9 residents were killed and hundreds of men and women injured. The camp has been under virtual siege for the best part of 2 years, with the denial of access for daily supplies and access to specialist medical assistance in Baghdad and elsewhere. More than 200 loudspeakers, surround the perimeter of the camp, night and day, broadcasting threats to kill the residents and to forcibly remove them from the camp. The international community needs to learn that more than words are needed if a humanitarian outrage at Ashraf is to be prevented, as it has done over Benghazi.
And sure enough, with the behavior that we now see at Camp Ashraf, we see that we have helped to install a government that is a puppet of Iran, and that is a disaster in Iraq. And our governments are supporting Prime Minister Maliki. We have the ability to simply make a phone call and get those troops out of Ashraf where they do not belong. And the leaders of both Britain and the United States should be making those phone calls today. We've heard about the loudspeakers and the psychological torture. Far more ominous is the presence of Iraqi troops in Ashraf. And we can do something about that. We should do something about that. And we will be judged by humanity if we don't do something about that. Now, I want to move to the discussion of the government in exile, because Ashraf is part of a government in exile which is headed by Madame Maryam Rajavi. This is a democratically elected person who has become, she calls herself the president-elect. I think she really is the president, since there is no democratically president-elect or presidential person in Iran. This is a government in exile. We should recognize the government of exile headed by Madame Rajavi as the legitimate government of Iran. It is an outrage that the MEK remains on the terrorist list of the United States. There is no legitimacy for this whatsoever. I don't believe the United States of America should wait for a court decision to get them off the list. We should get them off the list right now because it's a moral thing to do. And getting them off the list is not just the moral thing to do, it has an impact on the outcome of what happens on Ashraf. It is hard to argue that we should spend $600 million fighting off the people, the Gaddafi people, and we should ignore 3,400 people in whose country we have 50,000 troops right now. We need to get the MEK delisted. It is not a political matter anymore. It is a humanitarian matter, and we should take the MEK off the list and recognize them for what they are, which is the legitimate government of the Republic of Iran.
My uncle, President Kennedy, during the Cold War stood in Berlin when the great test of freedom was in Berlin. And he spoke about all free people being citizens of Berlin, because the fate of Berlin was the fate of all free people. We are at a moment now in the Middle East. The Berlin of today is in the Middle East. The Berlin of today is in places like Camp Ashraf. This quote was Ich bin ein Berliner. Today, we could easily say, Man Irani Hastam. Today we could easily say, Man Ashrafi Hastam. I want to say that there, but for the grace of God, goes each and every one of us. We could be in that camp tonight. You could. I could. Any one of us could. If we happened by dint of birth to be born in Iran and feel the oppression. If we were there, wouldn't we want someone else, somewhere else, who had the freedom to speak out, wouldn't we want them to say, enough is enough? What happens in Camp Ashraf happens to us. We're all human beings. We're all brothers and sisters. We're all children of God. And we demand the same kind of human dignity for the people of Camp Ashraf that we would demand for our own family members. I've heard people say that the MEK and Madam Rajavi are terrorists. I also recall history once again. My father, in leading the fight against apartheid, remembers when someone by the name of Nelson Mandela was also called a terrorist. Today, he is the father of a new South Africa. Tomorrow, Madam Rajavi is going to be the mother of a new Iran. And so, in the words of Madam Rajavi, Mitavan Vabayad. Let's get it done. Thank you.
Inside Iran, the most appalling abuses take place. Women and children are hanged. People are done to death for the crime of having contact with family members in Camp Ashraf. Political prisoners are dying because they are denied medical treatment. And as for Camp Ashraf, there could be no starker reminder of the brutality of the regime than one gets when one examines what is going on there. Hundreds of loudspeakers blaring out messages of hatred, loudspeakers placed outside the hospital to intimidate and terrify the patients, medical supplies and other supplies denied to the inhabitants, harassment and threats 24 hours a day. So, ladies and gentlemen, I reaffirm my determination to join with and support all those who are determined to put a stop to these horrors.
When we look at those photographs and see the films that many of us have seen of what is going on at Camp Ashraf, you don't have to look very far to see what is being done there. We know it's being done at the behest of the government of Iran, but it is a shame upon the government of Iraq. And indeed, those loudspeakers, those banks of loudspeakers which are around Camp Ashraf, and blaring noise all the time, disruptive noise, are the Iraqi government's voice of shame.
Like you, I have been shocked and horrified at seeing the tanks rolling in to Camp Ashraf. and surrounded by women. And there were the soldiers, sitting on top of their tanks, sitting in their tanks, paying no attention to being surrounded by women who clearly were pleading with them to go away. Think again. Tell Nouri al-Maliki not to do this to us, day after day, and face this appalling, appalling regime. We have to stand with them.
We have all been very concerned, the parliamentarians amongst us, with what is happening in Ashraf. It really is quite appalling that these people who have protected status under UN law should be facing the kind of persecution that is now their lot under the present situation. The present leadership in Iraq, unfortunately, has very strong connections with the present Iranian leadership. And as a result of that, our colleagues, our people in Ashraf are being persecuted.
It's almost impossible to comprehend the noise, the torture, psychological and mental, that people in Ashraf City are enduring 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
I just want to make a remark about recent calls by some regime affiliates who claim to be speaking for the Green opposition movement for the US to maintain the ban on the PMOI. These individuals in no way speak for the people of Iran. Their demands, in fact, have the hallmarks of the regime's intelligence ministry, whose agents routinely disguise themselves as opponents of the regime, but whose main task is to demonize the opposition. When they claim that the US delisting of the PMOI will greatly weaken Iran's internal opposition movement, what they really mean is that it will greatly weaken the regime and its suppression apparatus. The reality is that no patriotic Iranian would like to see the US administration continue to defy the rule of law and keep the one serious organised opposition movement which is dedicated to change on its terrorist list to help the mullahs suppress them. So my message, finally, ladies and gentlemen, to the Obama administration is to now lift the ban on the PMOI and stand with Iranian people and their organised opposition movement to bring about regime change to Iran.
I want to know why on earth Prime Minister Maliki is moving his armoured divisions into Ashraf and why he's collaborating with Iranian agents to deny people urgent medical treatment, to subject them to psychological torture and repeated assaults. I don't know what he thinks British and American soldiers died for, but they didn't die so that he could become a puppet of the mullahs. And I think it's time that Mr. Ad Melkert, the UN Secretary-General's Special Representative to Iraq, and Mrs. Navai Pillay, the UN Commissioner for Human Rights, raised with Prime Minister Maliki and the Secretary-General what's going on in Ashraf. It's time the actions of the Iranian agents were brought to an end. The last time I spoke at a rally, it was over in the Methodist Church over by the QE Centre there a few weeks ago, and there were several of us spoke, you'll recall, at that rally. And a few days later, I started getting emails and intimidatory phone calls from these people who wanted me to be aware that I shouldn't be backing the Iranian opposition. Well, I'm working on the assumption that the boys from the embassy will be listening in again today. So let me make it clear to them, you're wasting your time.